Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I'm so upset at him that I could do something I'll regret later, I muttered fiercely, taking another sip of my drink. Hey Kevin, don't even say things like that, Luke replied, which was amusing considering Luke used to have a worse temper than me in high school. He was always getting into arguments, the smallest thing might set him off. But he's cheating on me, I said. As far as I can tell, he's been playing about with his personal trainer for a few months. How could he have done that to me? Luke ordered only another round, and when it arrived at our table, he requested me to tell him what occurred. I didn't want to get into it, but it felt wonderful to speak about what occurred, kind of like talking about when you had surgery. So I began from the beginning. I always felt Emily and I had a nice marriage. Sure, we had disagreements from time to time, but what relationship doesn't? But we always kissed and made up later, and that's all that mattered. We enjoyed a somewhat prosperous financial life together. I dropped out of college in my junior year since academics were not for me, and I didn't need a degree because I'm a natural-born salesperson. I ended up getting a position at one of Ridgewood's two largest real estate businesses, and I was quickly making decent money. So Emily and I were engaged in her last year and married when she was a senior. The interesting thing is that Emily began her profession in sales after graduating. She went to work for a major biotechnology company. Essentially, this meant she sold prescribed medications to physicians. Anyway, the two of us were not wealthy, but we were doing well. There were no children yet, but I figured they would arrive eventually. Emily's physique was what drew me in at first. When I initially met her, she seemed slim and tight. Even after 4 years of marriage, she had managed to maintain her appearance. I suppose that was partly due to her wonderful genes, but she also became a fitness fanatic, going to the gym 3 or 4 times a week. The good news is that her figure was still tight and sexy, not in that pumped-up bodybuilder manner that makes me uncomfortable, but more like the Grace Hill lady you see on TV all the time. That was something I truly appreciated. But the bad news was that all that activity appeared to exhaust her. Lately, anytime I tried to spend time with her at night, all she wanted to do was sleep. But, as it turns out, there was another reason she didn't want to dance the horizontal mambo with me. That reason was Daniel Green, a doctor she saw on a daily basis. I discovered my wife's romance with the nice doctor by mistake. Emily, although being the smartest member of our family, is prone to forgetting things. I can't count how many times we've had to look for her misplaced mobile phone or return somewhere to recover the pocketbook she left behind. So it was not surprising to learn that she had left her notebook computer at home when she went to work that morning. But what surprised me was the email I saw in her inbox, headlined "Last night was so hot. You better know I read it quickly." Long story short, it became clear that she and Dr. Harper had been using email to schedule meetings in a hotel for months. Based on the text of the other emails I saw, it was clear that they were not meeting to discuss the relative advantages of various medications. When I looked through her sent mail folder and read some of what she had said to him, it became evident that this was much more than a casual flirtation. They were in the midst of a full-blown courtship. I never saw it coming, I lamented to Luke. What am I going to do, man? Well, if it was my wife, I'd give her a punch in the face right before I kicked her to the curb, Luke boasted. I could never hit Emily, I explained. I'm just going to have to divorce her and get on with my life, but I'd sure like to get back at Dr. Daniel Green for screwing up my marriage. As I sat there drinking, a thought occurred to me. I leaned across the table and talked to Luke quietly. Hey, buddy, would you be willing to give me a hand in getting a little payback? I think I know how we could do something that wouldn't come back on us. Luke's eyes glinted. Tell me what you've got, he said enthusiastically. My plan was simple: use Emily's email to get the good doctor to return to the hotel. But we'd be the ones waiting, not her. We'd tie him up, remove his clothing, and leave him there in his underpants. Then we'd call the TV news and have them ready to record him when the cops retrieved him. If it didn't reveal his real colors, nothing else would. But hell no, we did it, Luke insisted. I've got that covered, I informed him. We'll be wearing ski masks and we can use surgical gloves so we don't leave any fingerprints. It'll be perfect. Okay, smart guy, but you're forgetting one thing, he added. If he gets an email from Emily's account, he's going to guess you were the one who sent it. Maybe, I said, but even if he does, I don't think he'll say anything. If he does, he'll have to admit to having an affair, and he'll bet his wife wouldn't be too pleased about that. Luke glanced at me with shrewdness. You could be right, he responded. Besides, he might suspect you, but he couldn't prove anything, especially if I delete the email from Emily's computer after I send it. I said confidently, let's do it. Luke nodded enthusiastically. I hate cheaters. That bastard deserves it for screwing around with your wife. Okay, here's how we do it, I instructed him. Tonight I'll email him from Emily's computer and set up a meeting at their regular motel right after lunch tomorrow. You go book a room. When he shows up, instead of Emily, we'll grab him and tie him to a chair. Luke inquired enthusiastically, then we cut off his little manhood. No, I said immediately. We want to take the high road on this thing. We'll gag him, strip him down, tie him to a chair, and leave him. He'll make an anonymous call to the police about a disturbance in room 210. Then you call your buddy at the TV station and tell him you heard that the police are investigating something big at the motel. It'll be all over the news. He'll be the laughing stock of the town. If he keeps his mouth shut, it'll still be pretty embarrassing for him, I told him. Everybody will know he wasn't making a house call, and if he tells them why he went to the motel in the first place, everybody will know about his affair with Emily. Then he'll kick her to the curb. Sounds perfect, Luke chimed in enthusiastically. I can't wait. Just remember one thing, I said. When you rent that room, don't use your credit card. Why not? Luke inquired. Because you don't want the police to know you were the one who rented the room where the doc was grabbed, I said with rage. Oh, right, Luke said. I mentally shook my head. Luke was a lovely man, but he was unlikely to win any intelligence prizes anytime soon. When I went home that evening, I pretended everything was okay. I even mentioned to Emily that I was interested in some bedtime action after dinner, but she promptly dismissed the idea, as I had anticipated. I wasn't sure whether Thomas was wearing her out or if she was so focused on him that she didn't want me to touch her. Either way, I'd ditch her as soon as I had my vengeance on her boyfriend. After she went to bed, I noticed her wheeled suitcase, which she used to transport her medicine samples to the physicians. Sure enough, her iPad was inside. When I opened it, I saw that her email was password secured, which I expected given her tendency to forget things. Emily saved her passwords on a piece of paper in her wallet. I took it out, entered her password, and bingo, I was in. I immediately began typing out my little invitation to Dr. Harper, and I was certain I knew how to write it so he couldn't refuse. However, I barely made it halfway before coming to a standstill. We had a major issue. Luke was going to get a hotel room tomorrow, but I wanted to know which room to direct the good doctor to. Way to go, dumbass, I muttered at myself. No Nobel Prize for you either this year. I quickly contacted Luke. When he got on the phone, I said, "Can you talk?" "Certainly, I can," he said. "Can't you hear me?" No, I almost yelled. "I mean, can you talk without Karen hearing you?" "Oh," he said. "She's not here. You can go ahead." When I described my predicament, Luke answered, "That's no problem. Just make an anonymous call to the doctor tomorrow and tell him which room." "Yeah, that'll work," I cynically said. "Don't you think he might be a little suspicious if some guy calls to tell him where to meet Emily?" "Oh, right," Luke said. I repressed a moan. Then the solution struck me. "I got it," I said happily. "When you go to the motel tomorrow, rent a room for 2 days. Then I'll email him tomorrow night and tell the doc the meeting is set for the next day and which room to go to." "Okay," Luke said. "But what are we going to do with the room tomorrow?" "We're not going to do anything with it," I answered, attempting to suppress my agitation. "Well, that seems kind of waste to me," Luke observed. "Besides, I don't think my credit card can afford 2 days." "No credit cards, Luke," I screamed before clapping my palm over my lips to avoid waking Emily. I said it more quietly. "Look, he'll spot you the money if you're short, Luke, but use cash. Not your credit card. Don't forget, pay in cash." He agreed and we hung up. But I was starting to get a horrible feeling about everything. Nonetheless, Luke did as I instructed and phoned me the following day with the room number. "It was no problem, Tom," he added. The desk clerk hardly even looked at me. I paid in cash like we discussed, and get this, we got room 210. It's right on the end, so it should be extra quiet down there. "Sounds great, buddy," I said. "You've done good. You'll send out that email tonight, and you get that other stuff we discussed." "What other stuff?" Luke inquired. I sighed deeply but managed to keep my fury under control. "The duct tape and your camera," I reminded him. "You'll bring the surgical gloves and the ski masks for us to wear." "Oh, right," he said. As I hung up the phone, I cursed quietly. "If he repeats oh, right one more time, I swear I will scream." Here's the next portion, which continues with the adjustments you requested. That evening, when Emily went to bed early again, I was able to send my message to Dr. Harper without difficulty. In the email, I promised the man some amazing sex like he'd never had before if he came to room 210 at the hotel tomorrow at 1 p.m. I wrote, "I'm going to knock your socks off," and that sentence made me laugh all night. When the big day came, things didn't seem as funny to me. I started to worry whether I was going to do anything dumb, but then I recalled all those lovey-dovey letters between the two cheats and my rage flared up again. Dr. Harper, and Emily in particular, deserved the humiliation that was about to come their way. I was the devoted spouse who had been mistreated. They deserved what came to them. I called Luke on his mobile phone about mid-morning to make sure everything was set. He was supposed to come over to the dealership at 12:30 and pretend to be a customer so I could give him a test drive. That was our cover story, and I wanted to make sure everything was all right. "Where are you, Luke? Are you at home?" I questioned. "Nah," he said. "I spent the night in the motel room." "What?" I exclaimed. "Why did you do that?" "Well, it seemed like a shame to let it sit idle," Luke said. "Besides, Karen and I had a fight, and I needed to get out of the house." Once again, all I could do was shake my head. Luke's wife was a lovely little nurse who worked at the hospital. Emily recognized her since they both worked at the same gym. Karen appeared like a kind lady, but she and Luke were constantly bickering over something. Still, I didn't enjoy the notion of his leaving plenty of evidence in that hotel room. "I watched CSI," I said, "and I know what those investigators can find." "Luke," I remarked with a smile, "I thought we agreed we didn't want to leave any traces in the room." "Oh, right," Luke responded, and I bit my tongue to avoid screaming. "Listen, Luke, clean up your mess in there. Wipe off every surface you touched and then head on over to the dealership. Remember, you need to get here at 12:30 sharp." Despite my reservations, Luke arrived at the showroom at 12:30 precisely. I requested a demonstration, and we made our way to the hotel. When we arrived, I gave Luke a pair of medical gloves and grabbed my own. Then we entered the room, which was as messy as I had feared. I was concerned that Dr. Harper might arrive early, but when has a doctor ever kept an appointment on time? We worked together to make things as clean as possible before the doctor arrived. Luke and I closed the blinds and drapes in the room, and I turned out all of the lights. The final thing I did was repair the small flip security latch, which kept the door pushed open just a bit. Then we put on our ski masks and walked back around the corner. It was pitch black save for the light escaping beneath the door while we waited in quiet. Luke shocked me by leaning forward to speak in my ear. "It sure is spooky in here." It took all of my effort not to strangle him. "Be quiet, Luke," I muttered. "He could be outside right now." "Oh, right," Luke muttered. Before I could react, we heard footsteps in the hallway. I shushed Luke and pointed to the camera in his palm. He nodded, and I hoped that meant he recalled what he needed to do. I looked around the corner just as the door swung open. A guy entered the room. "Hey, Emily, where are you? You sexy lady," he said jokingly. I encouraged Luke to get ready. "Here I am," I whispered. When he turned toward us, Luke shot his camera. Dr. Harper shouted when the strong light blinded him. I waited till he finished scratching his eyes and dropped his hands before decking him. I'm a reasonably big man who's been in a few fights, so I understood how to handle myself. I think I threw a bit more into that sucker punch, since the doctor fell to the carpet like a stone. I began dancing and flailing my painful fist. Damn, that hurt, I complained. Thankfully, Luke was all business. He made sure the hotel room door was closed and secured before returning to check on the good doctor. "He's out like a light," Luke said admiringly. "Keep it down," I hissed. "Don't use my name." "Sorry, Tom," Luke apologized. "Come on," I ordered. "Help me get his clothes off." We removed our ski masks and attempted to undress the doctor. You'd be surprised how tough it is to undress a lifeless body, but after a lot of tugging and pushing, we managed to get the doctor down to his blue-striped underwear. We didn't want to touch his privates, so we stopped there. Then we forced him onto the desk chair and duct-taped him to it. Even though he seemed to be unconscious, I wasn't taking any risks on his waking up and shouting, so I taped his lips as well. "Okay," I responded. "We're done here. Let's dump his clothes in the dumpster in the parking lot, then get back to the dealership." "Sure," Luke said. "You don't want to cut off the bastard's pecker," he said, taking a sinister-looking folding knife from his pocket. "Put that away, Luke," I responded quickly. "We talked about that. All we want to do is humiliate him, not maim him." "Gotcha," Luke said, putting his knife aside. To my relief, we grabbed the remainder of the doctor's garments and went for the door. As we left, I used the metal safety latch to prevent the door from shutting. "Why did you do that?" Luke inquired. "So the police and the news crew can get into the room easily," I informed the man. "Oh, right," Luke said. I sighed as we exited the motel's back entrance. On the way back to the dealership, I threw the doctor's garments, gloves, and ski masks into a garbage. When we returned, Luke slid into his pickup truck to go. I leaned in his window to ensure he recalled what to do next. "I'm going to make an anonymous call to 911 and report a disturbance at the motel," I said. "As soon as you get home, call your buddy at the station and tell him you just saw the police pull into the motel and it looked like something big was going down." He nodded, and I could only pray he got it right. The test drive ID taken with Luke was only slightly longer than normal, and nobody mentioned it. I let out a mental sigh of relief. It seemed we'd gotten away with it. The remainder of the day seemed to drag on indefinitely, but eventually the day came to a close, and I got in my vehicle and drove to the pub to meet Luke. I was so pumped up that I felt practically euphoric. The image of Dr. Harper being marched out of a shady hotel in his boxers on the nightly news had me salivating. The only thing better would be to see Emily's expression as she watched beside me. Luke, of course, was already at a table and had a drink waiting for me. "Well?" I said hopefully. "Did you call your buddy at the station like we discussed?" "Yep," he said, taking a big sip from his bottle. "Did the news crew get the doc on tape coming out of the motel?" "Sure did." "Well, what did your friend say?" "How did Harper look?" Luke just shook his head. "You couldn't really tell because of the body bag." "Body bag?" "Just the body bag. The doc was dead." I looked at him with dismay. "He's dead, Tom," Luke replied. "They had to carry him out in a bag." "How is that possible, Luke?" "He was fine when we left him, except maybe for that lump on his jaw. Someone must have come in the room after we left and done him," according to Luke. "Tom, when my buddy called me back to thank me for the tip, he said a maid found the doc with his throat cut, clean as a whistle. There was blood everywhere. It'll be the lead story on the news tonight." Up until now, the only time I'd ever felt dizzy was when I took a hard lick playing football in high school, but I felt like I was about to pass out. This had to be the very worst thing that could have occurred. I took a long gulp of my beer to calm myself down and glanced at Luke. "Do the police know who did it?" I inquired. "No," Luke said quietly. "My buddy said nobody saw or heard nothing." "Listen, Luke, this is bad, real bad," I remarked to you. "If this comes back on us, we're in real trouble." "Why?" Luke inquired. "We didn't kill him, you know that, and I know that. But the police don't know about it," I lamented. "If they find out we were the ones who tied him up, it's for damn sure they are going to try to pin the murder on us." "Oh, right," Luke said. I wanted to reach across the table and strangle him, but I knew I couldn't lose control. "Listen, Luke, I told you, we've got to keep absolutely quiet about this. You can talk to anyone, not Karen, not your buddy at the TV news, not anybody. If you do, we could wind up going to prison. Understand? Sure, Tom, sure, Luke responded, making that ridiculous hand and mouth motion we learned in 5th school. I feared I would feel ill to my stomach when I left to go home. I could only hope that Luke would remain silent, but I doubted he would be able to do so for long. I was certain that if the police ever brought him in for questioning, we were lost. Why the heck did I have to attempt to get back at that down doctor? Why hadn't I simply filed for divorce from Emily and let things go? Emily. Oh my God. I'd planned to confront her about her infidelity tonight. So it was out the window now. I'd simply have to go home and be big, stupid, and happy around her. What a hassle that would be. I thought I could trick her. When I came home, it was worse than I had anticipated. Emily ran up to me as soon as I stepped in and fell into sobs. What is it, honey? I inquired. What's wrong? Oh, Tom, she wept. It's so horrible. That nice Dr. Harper, the one I call on all the time, has been murdered. It's all over the news. I wanted to convey astonishment and sympathy. What happened? I inquired. They found his body in a motel room, she cried. His throat had been cut. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I couldn't help but think, they found him in a motel room. Sounds like he must have been meeting someone for a little afternoon delight. You don't know that. She screamed at me. Anyway, you need to get your mind out of the gutter at a time like this. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean to make light of such a terrible tragedy, I grumbled. It truly irritated me to have to say good things about the jerk. I didn't want to see him slain, but I wasn't very upset about it, and knowing the actual reason Emily was so angry stung much more. This was how the whole evening went. Emily was in tears every time she entered the room. When we watched the news, she hid her face in her handkerchief. It made me ill, particularly when the TV reporter said what a tremendous loss his death was to the town. It wasn't supposed to be this way, I reasoned. They should be talking about what a low-down cheating scumbag he was, not praising him. Emily went to bed without eating supper, so I had to prepare myself a sandwich to prevent starving. But the fact is, I wasn't very hungry. In addition to the stress of pretending to be a caring husband around Emily, I was terrified of what might happen next. Luke and I tried to be cautious, but what if we left some proof behind? What would I say to the cops if they came after me? Who would have thought that we had tied Harper up but hadn't hurt him save for that small touch on his jaw? After a restless night, I returned to work the next day, but there was no respite. Dr. Harper had previously purchased automobiles from us, and his murder was the main subject of talk. Everyone has an idea about who did it and why. I considered offering an alternative explanation in the hopes of throwing folks off course, but I couldn't think of anything. Finally, I decided to remain quiet and hope that everything would blow over fast. When I met Luke at the pub that evening, it was clear that he was excited to see me. You'll never guess what I learned about the doc's murder, he said loudly as I approached his table. Be quiet, Luke. I yelled at him. I thought we weren't going to talk about that with anyone. Sure, he said. But you've got to hear this. My buddy at the station learned something the police haven't told anyone yet. Despite my fear, I couldn't stop being intrigued. Well, what is it? He leaned across the table towards me. When the police found his body, the killer had carved a word into his chest, according to Luke. They figure it was a revenge killing. Wow, I said, settling back. That was a shocker. I tried to think about the consequences of it all. That's not all, Luke said. The cops are pretty sure the killer was a man. They don't think a woman would have been strong enough to knock him out, strip him, and wrestle him into a chair. They figure it would have taken a pretty big guy to do all that. My mind began to race with the final bit of information. Oh, geez, Luke, I'm in for it now. If they ever connect us with this, we'll probably wind up in the chair. But you didn't do it, Luke insisted. Yeah, but how am I going to prove that? I said. I had the motive, I fit the description, and I sure had the opportunity. All they are missing is the murder weapon. I've been watching those true crime shows on TV, Luke was saying. You probably threw the murder weapon away. Luke, you're not helping here. I said. I didn't do it, I said. Oh, right. The previous night had been awful enough, but tonight was worse. Hell, if I looked at all of the evidence, I would believe I was guilty. The only good news for me was that tomorrow was my off day, so I didn't have to listen to all that continuous discussion about the murder at the dealership. But it didn't help me sleep any better. Emily left the home the following day to go to the gym, most likely to attempt to work off her sadness via exercise. I decided to perform some yard work to temporarily distract myself from my troubles. It was a beautiful day, and the grass really needed mowing, so I stripped down to an old pair of shorts and went to work in the front yard. While I was hacking away at my lawn in ever smaller squares, a vehicle came up in front of our home and a beautiful young lady stepped out. When she began heading toward me, I hurriedly turned off the mower's engine. She seemed to be inspecting me attentively as she approached. "Is your wife home?" she inquired. Damn, it must be the Avon lady, I thought. "No, sorry," I answered, smiling. "You just missed her. I'm her husband, Tom. I'm the only one here." She dug inside her purse and took out a card. "I'm Detective Olivia Ross. Would you have her call me when she gets back? I'd like to ask her a few questions about Dr. Daniel Green." A rush of terror passed through me. "Why do you want to talk to her about him?" I inquired a bit too soon. The detective smiled as she reached out to stroke my hand. "Don't be alarmed," she said. "We're just trying to talk to everyone who had contact with Dr. Harper. His office staff told us that your wife is one of the drug company representatives who called on him regularly." "Oh, right," I said, thinking it sounded just as ridiculous as when Luke said it. While I was inwardly berating myself, she continued to gaze at me admiringly, and I wondered whether she was flirting with me or assessing my criminal potential. Finally, she inquired, "What about you? Did you know Dr. Harper?" "Sure, I knew him," I responded, before realizing what I had said. "I mean, I knew of him through Emily, but I've never actually been introduced to him." She glanced at me for a while more before saying, "Okay, thanks for your cooperation. Don't forget to ask your wife to call me." Then, as she began to depart, she hesitated and said, "See you around." I looked at her as she went away. Why in the hell did I say I knew Harper? I wondered myself. I wonder if I sounded suspicious. What exactly did she mean by "see you around"? Needless to say, whatever peace and calm I'd found while working in the yard was long gone. That night, the local nightly news included an interview with the police chief regarding the Harper murder. "We've uncovered important new evidence in the case and hope to make an arrest in the near future," he said with a grin. My blood pressure tried to ascend Mount Everest. I couldn't wait to meet with Luke and find out whether his source knew anything about the newest developments. Even before we were seated at the bar table, I started asking my buddy questions. "The chief is bluffing," Luke said plainly. "My buddy says they got nothing new. They are just hoping to flush somebody out of cover. But the CSI guys have had time to go over that motel room with a fine-tooth comb. Maybe they turned up something. My friend says so many guests stayed in that room and it's been cleaned so many times that there was nothing they could use," Luke told me. Then his face became anxious. "You don't look so good, Tom. You've got to ease up a little. Don't let this thing get to you." "That's easy for you to say," I yelled at him. "You didn't have a police detective come to your house yesterday. Was it a woman named Monica?" he said as I nodded in amazement. "Yeah, the same one was at the hospital fishing around. She even talked to Karen. They've got nothing. They are just grasping at straws." When I left the bar, I continued thinking about what Luke had said. How could he be so calm while I was going insane with worry? How could he be so certain that his friend at the TV station understood the full story? Eventually, I came to the conclusion that Luke's optimism was inversely proportional to his IQ, and because I had taken a glimpse at Luke's IQ score in his file before he dropped out of high school, that concept terrified me. After another restless night and numerous handfuls of antacids, I realized I needed to do something. There was no way I was going to endure until the cops apprehended the murderer, particularly since I was the most probable suspect. I believed my only chance of saving my neck was to attempt to identify the genuine culprit on my own. The only issue with that approach was that I had absolutely no clue how to conduct a murder investigation. Sure, it was simple on TV, but how would I accomplish it in real life? Think. I reminded myself. Okay, I had to assume that whoever killed Dr. Harper knew him. It seemed pretty unlikely that a total stranger would wander into a motel room and kill whoever he happened to find tied to a chair. And what about that gash into Harper's chest? If that was a random act, I'd eat my hat. So, other from myself, who would want to assassinate Dr. Harper? No, wait, I thought. I didn't want to kill the doc. I just wanted to humiliate him. It was somebody else who wanted him dead in a very unpleasant manner. But who? Since I didn't know Harper, I'd have to ask someone who did. I could not think of a better source than his wife. Perhaps she might name someone who has anything against her late spouse. Okay, all I had to do now was find out how to persuade her to speak to me, a total stranger. I will confess that what I did next was really dumb, but I was becoming more frantic with each passing minute, and I couldn't think of anything else to do. So, on my next day off, I went to the shop and purchased a gold-painted toy detective's badge. It would never pass careful scrutiny, but all I could do was bluff my way through it. Besides, I'd seen someone do something like that in a movie based on true events, so it may work for me too. So I put on a suit and tie and headed over to the late Dr. Harper's residence. It was every bit as remarkable as you'd expect from an accomplished doctor. I waited in the circular driveway for a minute, trying to get the nerve to go visit the doctor's wife. I knew the odds of her talking to me were small. I realized my prospects of learning anything meaningful were minimal. But I knew I didn't want to go to jail and become Bubba's lover, so I stepped up and rang her doorbell. The lady who answered the door reminded me of cut flowers that had been in a vase for too long. The beauty was still there, but it was fading quickly. I could also see the highball glass she was holding in her hand. That wasn't helping her appearance either. I held out the badge I'd fastened inside my wallet and said, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harper. I'm Detective Samuel Pierce." "Another one?" She interrupted me. "Well, I hope you're the good cop," she said, her voice slurring slightly. "What?" I inquired, puzzled. "Isn't that the way you people do it?" she inquired. "The woman I talked to the other day was definitely the bad cop, so I hope you're the good cop." "Oh well, never mind," I said. "Come on in," she replied, gesturing with her drink for me to enter. "Want to join me in a little scotch and soda?" she offered as she led me into her den. "No thanks," I said. "I'm on duty." "Well, there's no point in wasting it," she said, before mixing herself another. Based on the lurch in her gait, this wasn't her first refill of the day. When she returned and sat down, I opened the little pad I'd purchased to seem professional. "I wish Hello Kitty wasn't on the cover. First, Mrs. Harper, let me extend my sympathies on the tragic loss of your husband." Yeah, he's dead." "Let's get on with it," she responded quickly. I couldn't help but be astonished by her attitude. "If you don't mind my saying so, Mrs. Harper, you don't seem to be mourning his passing very deeply," I said. "Mourning? Hell, I'm celebrating," she said, taking another sip of her scotch. "My late husband was cheating on me, detective. As far as I'm concerned, he got what he deserved." I wondered whether she knew about Emily, but I thought it wasn't a good idea to inquire. Nonetheless, I was interested about her attitude. "Well, if he cheated on you, why didn't you just divorce him?" I requested an explanation. "Couldn't afford to," she answered sadly. "I signed a prenuptial agreement when we got married. If I divorced him, I'd walk away with nothing more than what I brought into the marriage. No, the truth is, somebody offing the bastard was the best thing that could have happened to me." I blinked in amazement. Wow, if ever anybody wanted to incriminate herself for murder, she sure just did, I thought, but if she had killed her husband, why would she say anything like that, especially to a cop? Maybe she'd had more to drink than I realized, or maybe she was innocent and naive, but I didn't want to leap to conclusions. So I asked her about other suspicions. "Mrs. Harper, do you know of anyone who might have had a motive for killing your husband?" "Oh, sure," she said, slurring her words. "Several of them, really. I said, surprised. Several. Sure. It could have been any one of the wives' husbands he screwed, she answered casually. My late husband just couldn't keep his pants zipped over the years. He cheated on me numerous times. It wouldn't surprise me if a jealous husband decided to get revenge. She gave a bitter little shake of her head. My Morris was a real 304, she said. I almost gasped out loud when she stated it. Her use of the term 304 did not seem like a coincidence to me. Even though it was very suspicious, it was not a confession. Besides, she had just given me numerous other plausible candidates to look into. This detective game was becoming complex. Do you know who his lovers were? I said, little hesitant, wondering whether she might mention Emily. Not a clue, she replied. After the first time I caught him cheating, I quit caring. Damn, I thought. There went that lead. But didn't you worry that he might fall in love with one of them and dump you? I was asking. Like I said, Morris just couldn't be faithful to me or anyone else, but I always knew he'd stay with me because he liked the image he projected in the community of a happily married man. I felt sad for her. What a bad marriage. What about disease? I said. Weren't you worried about him infecting you or something? She grinned at me. He was a doctor, she said. Even if he did get something, he knew how to cure it. Besides, once I realized what was going on, I quit sleeping with him. I haven't been with a man in a long time. She set down her glass and gave me a long, calculated look. You know, you're a pretty nice-looking guy. How'd you like to end a girl's long drought with that? To my surprise, she rapidly slipped off the sofa onto her knees, crawled down in front of me, and started fumbling with my zipper. No, wait, Mrs. Harper, I replied. I mean, I'd really like to, but I'm a happily married man. I then came to a standstill. I was no longer a happily married guy. In fact, I hadn't planned on getting married anytime soon. The prospect of exacting some post-mortem vengeance on my wife and her husband appealed to me greatly. And because I hadn't been laid in a long time, I was instantly horny as hell. I stopped resisting. Come on, baby, she murmured, staring up at me. I want you in me right now. It was harsh and vocal. I prayed her neighbors hadn't heard us, otherwise, they may have called the police to report another murder. Mrs. Harper leaned back and gave me an appreciative smile after a few minutes. Oh baby, that was so good. I didn't realize how much I missed it, stated the woman. I glanced at her with a combination of wonder and adoration as she stood up and prepared herself another drink. What now? She inquired. No, thanks, I said. I need to get back home, to the station. She gave me a lazy look as I zipped up my jeans. That was a lot of fun, she explained. We ought to do that again. Hey, what did you say your name was? I was becoming apprehensive now. I didn't say, I replied as I moved for the door. Oh, she said unconcernedly. Well, anyway, call me. With that, I slid out the door and dashed to my vehicle. As I drove away, I was pleased with the unexpected interlude I'd had, but my mood immediately deteriorated as I recalled what Shed told me before jumping my bones. If Dr. Harper was indeed a cheater, he may very easily have been the victim of a jealous spouse. Other than myself, it seems to be a potential path of investigation. There may be other people with a motive, but how was I going to research them when I had no idea who the doctor's other loves were? In fact, the greater the number of probable suspects, the more difficult it would be for me to limit them down. Then I thought about Mrs. Harper. Although I found her to be a talented and eager lover, I couldn't help but worry whether she was also a cold-blooded murderer. If Shed received the email inviting her husband to the hotel, she might have waited until Luke and I departed, then crept in to exact her retribution. Doing it that way would have left the two of us to take the blame while she received her husband's estate. I have to agree that would have been quite slick if she'd been the murderer. But if she had slain her husband, why would she reveal her intentions to a detective? That felt like a really stupid thing to do. But what if she was more cunning than she appeared? What if she purposefully gave facts regarding the prenup to throw me off track? Was she really a lusty widow, or had she enticed me to distract me? The more I thought about it, the more my head ached. Thankfully, it was time to meet with Luke. I wanted someone to chat to about all of this over a cool drink. I told Luke everything I had learned from Mrs. Harper and explained my situation. I said to him, now I have more potential suspects than I know what to do with. How am I ever going to find the real killer? Well, says Luke, if you did know who it was, I bet you could make a bunch of money. I stared at him, puzzled. What are you talking about? It's simple, Luke said. I bet the real killer would pay you almost anything to keep you from telling the police. That's blackmail, Luke, I muttered, scratching my head. We've got enough problems on our hands without adding a blackmail charge. Oh, right, Luke said. Instead of becoming frustrated with Luke, I began to consider his proposal. Wait a minute, I thought. Perhaps it's not such a horrible idea after all. I saw it on a TV show once. All we have to do is get the word out that we know who did the dirty deed and we want some money to keep quiet about it. Then when somebody shows up to make a deal, we've got the real killer. Wow, Luke said. That's really smart, Tom. His smile faded. But how are you going to get the word out to the killer when you don't even know who he is? I think I know a way, I smugly said. How did the killer know we were going to meet up with Dr. Harper at the motel in the first place? The way I figure it, he or she, I thought of Mrs. Harper, must have seen the fake email I sent from Emily's account. So, we just send out another one the same way and see who takes the bait. But how's Dr. Harper going to get the email, Tom? He's dead, Luke said. I know Dr. Harper's dead, Luke, but his murderer isn't. And he's the one we want. He'll see the new email the same way he got the old one, and when he shows up, we'll nab him. Luke congratulated me, you're a genius, and I had to agree. I resolved to put my plan into action straight now. On my way home from the pub, I stopped at the ATM to get some cash. Then I drove to the hotel and booked a room for 2 days. The desk clerk was a bored adolescent who was so focused on watching TV that he hardly glanced at me. On a whim, I decided to request room 210 again. That will send shivers down the killer's spine, I laughed to myself. The following morning, I went up early to send my message from Emily's machine before she awoke. I had spent quite some time composing it the night before, and I was fairly pleased with the results. I know who you are, and I know what you did to Dr. Harper. If you don't want me to go to the police, you'd better come to the same room in the same motel where Dr. Harper died. Be there at 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon and bring $20,000 in cash with you, or else. That should do it, I thought. I clicked send and took careful to erase the sent mail from Emily's computer, exactly like the previous time. The trap is set, I assured myself. Now, let's see who takes the bait. I went to work as normal, although it was difficult to maintain my attention. I was wondering who will come up in that hotel room tomorrow. I thought I may not even recognize the individual, particularly if he was one of the irate spouses. By the time I got off work and headed to the pub, I was eager to share everything with Luke and hear his response. But Luke wasn't there, and after waiting over an hour, he never arrived. That made me really worried. Luke was always ready for a drink. What may have happened to him? As I drove home, my uneasiness intensified. What if the cops had apprehended Luke? What if he was telling them everything we had done at that very moment? What if they were waiting outside my home to arrest me? I was so caught up in my concerns that I made it all the way home before realizing where I was. Thankfully, no one was waiting for me there. Even Emily had not arrived home yet. Only a few minutes later, I heard Emily pull up. By the time she entered the home, I had put on my loving husband face for her. But it didn't matter how I appeared since she was completely captivated. You'll never guess what happened today, she said eagerly. My heart almost stopped. Your friend Luke is a fugitive from the law, she told you. I looked at her in disbelief. He and Karen got into a big fight, and he gave her a black eye. She called the cops, and he took off for parts unknown. I figured if they caught him and started grilling him about Dr. Harper, our goose was cooked. But Emily continued talking about the problem and didn't see my anxiety. To hide my feelings, I tried to be interested in what she was saying. Why were they fighting, anyway? I said when I had the opportunity to speak out. The girls at the gym told me Luke thought Karen was cheating on him, she said. I mentally shook my head in dismay. Are there any more devoted wives? That notion revived all of my rage at Emily, and I added sarcastically, well, if she was cheating, it serves her right. I expected Emily to go all on me for that little statement, but she did not reply. That just made me madder. What a hypocrite, I thought. You're the worst cheater I know, yet if I lifted a finger at you, you'd scream bloody murder. Yet, for once, I kept my thoughts private. I didn't say anything more to Emily throughout dinner, and then I walked to the den to ponder about the recent development. Suddenly, I got a terrifying notion. What if Luke was the killer? I recalled the folding knife he'd brought with him when we tied up Dr. Harper. What if Luke snuck back and completed the doc after we left the hotel because Karen was cheating on him? I didn't want to accept it, but everything made sense in a horrible manner. Then I had a far worse notion. What if Luke decides to show up at the hotel tomorrow? I was larger than him, but I wasn't sure I could beat him in a fight, especially if he had that folding knife. I figured I'd best bring some additional protection, so I walked down to the basement and retrieved my automatic from where I'd stashed it. I hadn't fired it in a long time, but I assumed it was still okay. The following morning, I went to work as usual, except that I was carrying my weapon in the vehicle. After lunch, I informed the manager that I would need to take the rest of the day off. He didn't like it, but I was one of his best salespeople, so he couldn't do much about it. I left the dealership and arrived at the hotel over a half hour early. I walked to the room, slipped a revolver into the pocket of my coat jacket, and opened the door with the card key. I nearly closed the door behind me, but at the last moment, I recalled that I wanted the murderer to be able to enter, so I propped the door open with the latch. Then I got into a chair and prepared to wait. I sat there and gazed around the room. It was clear they had placed new carpet. I shuddered, thinking that the old one had too much blood on it. Even the chair I was sitting on seemed to be new, so I assumed they had replaced that as well. Otherwise, everything seemed to be as it had been the last time I visited. That didn't make me any more relaxed. I didn't want to think about it anymore, so I started running over my list of suspects. The first one has to be Mrs. Harper. She had a huge motivation, but I couldn't believe she was the one. After all, she had put up with so much from her husband for so long, and I couldn't understand why she would suddenly decide to do something so dramatic. Still, I wondered whether she had hit her breaking point. And don't forget, I reminded myself, she was the most likely to have access to Dr. Harper's correspondence. The spouses of the other ladies Dr. Harper had sex with arrived next. I wasn't sure who they were or how many there were, but one of them may be aggressive. Perhaps he was following the doctor, waiting for the appropriate opportunity. I had no idea how he acquired access to the doctor's email, but if he had, he would have known we had provided him with a wonderful chance for vengeance. Then I thought of Luke. I really hoped it wasn't him, but I had to concede he was a plausible possibility. I knew he had a temper, and to be honest, he also had a bit of a nasty streak. I never imagined Luke could trick me, but maybe he was smarter than I knew. It seems implausible, but I could not rule it out. Just then, I heard a noise in the hallway and grabbed my revolver. The door creaked as it was pushed open, and weak light from the corridor filtered into the chamber. Then, to my surprise, I heard a voice say, "Tom, are you in there?" "Doris," I said with amazement. "What are you doing here?" I leaned over and turned on the lights, only to watch my beloved wife enter the room, shaking her head in disdain. "I'm here to stop you from doing something really stupid," she told me. "But how did you know I'd be here?" I inquired, puzzled. She crossed her arms and started lecturing me in that schoolteacher tone of voice I despised. "I got up yesterday morning," she continued. "It was obvious you'd been messing with my tablet. I checked my email, and at first, I didn't find anything. But when I checked my deleted items, I found your stupid message. Damn, I said to myself. I should have thought of that." "There are a lot of things you should have thought about," she told me. "Maybe if you hadn't dropped out of college." "Don't go giving me a hard time about that again," I said furiously to her. "Besides, I'm the one who's got a right to be upset, not you. You were cheating on me with your damn doctor friend. I caught you, and now I'm going to divorce your ass." She made a dismissive motion with her hand, as if shooing away a fly. "That's not important right now," she answered. What's important is what you're doing here. Just exactly what did you hope to accomplish with that ridiculous email you sent from my account? I was upset by her cavalier disregard of her adultery, but I felt compelled to defend myself. Nonetheless, I started to tell how Luke and I had brought Dr. Harper here to humiliate him, only to discover later that he had been killed. We were afraid the police would think we did it, I informed her. So I started trying to find the real killer. I told her how I pretended to be a detective to interview Mrs. Harper and how I'd come up with the idea of trying to lure the real killer here by pretending to be a blackmailer. Doris continued to sigh while listening. Finally, she raised her hand to stop me. Tom, are you familiar with Alexander Pope? No, I said, shaking my head. I don't think I ever met him. She rolled her eyes. Mr. Pope once said, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep, or taste not the Pierian spring. What's this Pierian spring? I inquired. What are you talking about? Never mind, Tom. You wouldn't understand, she said, tossing her head in disdain. She took a long breath and placed her hands on her hips, and I knew I was really in for it. You were never the brightest bulb in the lamp, she advised, but this plan has to be the dimmest, dumbest thing I've ever heard. In the first place, Harper is dead. Why would anybody be checking the mailbox of a dead man? Why would they have access to it in the first place? Well, they might have, I said defensively. Anyway, you'll bet Mrs. Harper had access to it. That lush. Doris chuckled. She has a hard enough time finding her way to the Scotch bottle, much less into her husband's email account. Well, none of that really matters anyway, I said abruptly, because I think the real killer still got the message. And just who is that, pray tell? She said cynically. No matter how much I disliked it, I had a thought. I think the real killer was Luke. I think he found out that Dr. Harper was sleeping with Karen after he and I left the motel. I think he came back and slit Harper's throat. So I'm betting that Luke's going to come walking through that door any minute. Which is why you need to get the hell out of here right now. Doris went into her handbag, took out a pair of medical gloves and started pulling them on. I knew she always had some due of her employment at the pharma business, but I couldn't understand why she needed them now. She then glanced up at me. I'm pretty sure Luke isn't going to come walking through that door anytime soon, Tom, she remarked with a grin. Why not? I inquired, more perplexed than ever. Because the police arrested him today. The idiot went to that same bar where you two hang out all the time, and the police were waiting for him. Is Luke the murderer, or is there more to this story? Please let us know in the comments. Do not forget to like and subscribe.